Last night, German voters decided their delegation to the European Parliament in Brussels. We had the EU elections last night across the entire continent of Europe, and I want to give a kind of quick overview and look at the results specifically for Germany. This is going to be a quick general rundown of the situation, what happened, what each party got, how many seats they're going to get, and later on in this week, I will do some more videos on some of the other countries and also more deep dive into what happened in Germany. Maybe look at the different age groups and the way the different states voted. Now, if we look at the results, we can see that the CDU-CSU clearly won this election. They came in first place with 30% of the vote, clearly ahead of any other party. The AfD came in second with 15.9% of the vote, the SPD in third with 13.9%, the Greens in fourth with 11.9%, the BSV, the New Alliance Sarah Wagenknecht, with 6.2%, came in fifth place, beating Die Linke, and the FDP, the Liberal Party, came in sixth place, winning 5.2% of the vote, followed by the various minor parties that competed in the EU elections due to there being no electoral threshold. Now, if we take a look for these results, it's kind of a mixed bag for each of the parties. Now, for the CDU-CSU, this is no doubt a victory. They came first place by a wide margin, and they also improved upon the results from 2019. And if you compare this to the last federal election where they got only 25%, this is a very good result for them. Nonetheless, they did expect somewhat to do better. There were some polls that showed the CDU at 31, 32%. So it was not a complete landslide victory for the CDU. They could have done maybe slightly better, but nonetheless, this was a good night for the party. They were able to win clearly ahead of the other parties, and so this is, for the CDU-CSU, definitely a victory. Now, for the AfD, this is somewhat of a mixed result. Obviously, in the summer of 2023, a year ago, they were at 23% in the polls. And so this, 15.9%, yes, it is their best result ever. It is the first time that they've come second place nationwide in an election. Those are two very important milestones for the party. It is not the large amount of support, the strong 20% and above that they were hoping for, that they initially expected even, months ago. And this has to do with a lot of things. There were a number of scandals that affected the AfD, but also the entrance of the BSV into the political scene affected that. And if you take a look at the polls from October or November of 2023 or earlier this year, you can see that the BSV really started to eat into the AfD's margins, and those two scandals that happened with their lead candidates also affected the party, so they kind of dropped in the polls. Now, this is, like I said, going to be disappointing for them because it was not a 10-point swing for the AfD. They did not win second place by a large margin, but they did manage to beat the SPD and the Greens. So relatively speaking, compared to what was expected, what had happened with the recent scandals and polls over the last month, they did manage to hold on to second place, which was a milestone for them. They haven't done that before. They were able to win the biggest amount of support that they've ever done. The highest before was 12.6 at the 2017 federal election. And so this is, relatively speaking, a victory for them, not as big of a victory as they had wanted, but nonetheless very important. And this is a very historic moment for Germany because this is the first time that the AfD, a very right-wing nationalist party in Germany, has managed to win second place. And a lot of the political establishment does not like the AfD. They have a very negative view of the party. It is seen as extreme by a lot of its political opponents, but the party, of course, itself positions themselves as an alternative to the CDU-CSU, which they see as has become too liberal. So a big victory for the AfD and a shock to the other parties. Now, for the SPD, the party of Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz, this is a bad result. I mean, even if they have gotten 15, 16%, this would have still been bad because this is a 10-point drop from what they got in the last federal election. And also, this is the party of Germany's Chancellor. This is a major party in Germany. This is a party that has dominated German federal politics since the end of World War II and even before then. And them only getting, barely getting 14% of the vote is definitely not a good result for them. The fact that they dropped even further than they did in 2019, which was already their worst result, is a bad sign for the party. Now, the biggest kind of surprise of the night was how bad the Greens did. Now, the polls were expecting the Greens to lose, but not really by this margin. Now, the Greens in the last election in 2019 won 20.5% of the vote. It was a huge milestone for the Greens because it was the first time that they came second place in a nationwide election. They doubled their support, going from around 9-10% to 20%. A huge victory from the Greens. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that the focus on the issues in the campaign in 2019 were on climate, on environmental issues, and there was a lot of youth movement and youth kind of support for the Greens, and that kind of propelled them to the forefront of the political discussion. That has clearly changed. There's a lot more discussion about foreign policy, economics, migration is also still a big topic, and so the Greens lost a lot of support. You see a minus 8.6 drop in support, going from 20.5 to only 11.9, a very large drop. And we can also see that the FDP over here won 5.2%. This is definitely, again, it's a mixed bag for them. Yes, they got over 5%. That is a good sign, showing that they might have the potential to reach the 5% threshold for the next Bundestag election in a year. However, this is still a drop in support from what they got last federal election in 2021. 5.2% is not where they want to be. That is no doubt a bad, terrible result for the party, but it's not a result that's going to get them totally wiped out if they can repeat that. So it's bad, but it's not necessarily totally catastrophic. But we can see here clearly the parties of Germany's traffic light coalition, the SPD, Greens, and FDP all ended up losing support. There was around a 10-point swing against the parties of the current federal government in this European election. So it was somewhat of a test on Olaf Scholz and the traffic light coalition, and it is clear that the traffic light parties failed that test. Now, the BSV, the Alliance Sarah Wagenknecht, was able to clear the 5% threshold, winning 6.2%, and this was definitely a good result for them. They were able to get enough support, especially as a party that's very new, that's only been founded officially, a few months ago, and they were able to beat Die Linke, the party they split away from them, doubling the support from Die Linke, clearing, 6%, and that is a good sign, because if they're able to repeat that, same as the FDP, in the next Bundestag election, that'll show that they will be able to win seats. You had the Free Voters, which is very strong in Bavaria, win some support. Die Linke, of course, a party that has been part of the German political scene for almost 3 decades now, over 3 decades actually, including their predecessor, the PDS, is basically in a existential crisis. They fell to 2.7%. This is a terrible result for them. And if they start getting wiped out in German state legislatures and in the Bundestag, we could see Die Linke cease to exist as a major player. They might still exist on some city councils in some states where it's a stronghold for them, but it shows that them as a player in federal politics is going to be waning, and they will likely be replaced by the BSV. You also have the Volt Party, which is a very pro-EU party that does very well amongst the youth, wins some support. They were able to win some extra seats. And then the other parties down here were able to win kind of 0.5 to 1.5% of the vote. Now, if you take a look at the way the seats work, the CDU and the CSU together did not gain any seats. They held their own, and so there wasn't really much of a change there. The Greens ended up losing 9 seats, a big dip in support, a big drop in seats, and that hurt the European-wide Greens as well. Germany's Green Party was the largest out of the European Green bloc, and them losing almost half of their seats was a big hit. The SPD lost 2 seats. This was a small loss, but nonetheless, this is on top of the losses they already sustained in 2019. The AfD gained 4 seats, of course, not a huge improvement, but their best result. They were able to win back not only the seats they lost from defections, but also gain some additional ones. The Die Linke lost 2 down to 3. The FDP won 5. Die Partei, the satirical party, won 2. The Free Voters won 3. There were some other various parties that won 1 seat. Volt was able to gain 2 up to 3 seats, a big victory for them. Of course, being a minor party, they weren't able to cross 5%, but their goal was to win at least 1 or 2 more EU seats, and they were able to do that. The BSV Alliance Sarah Wagenknecht was able to win 6 seats. That is a big number for them, especially as a new party. Now, when you take a look at the map, it's very interesting. We can see a very funny picture, and this has been something that has been kind of shown in the polls, and that is the exact map of the divide between East and West Germany, and it is almost 1-for-1, that the AfD has won almost every single East German district, inclusive of some of the ones in East Berlin, with the exception of a few. And everywhere else, especially in Western Germany, we see the CSU in Bavaria and the CDU winning most of the districts in the West, except for a few cities and towns that went for the Greens or the SPD that are strongholds for those parties. Now, in the next video, I will do a kind of deep dive into each of these states, but this was very important because we can see how these trends might affect the states and their state elections and their statewide politics going forward. The AfD did not really do that well. In Western Germany, they lost a lot of the support due to the scandals. And in East Germany, they dropped some and they lost also some support to the BSV. However, they were able to win East Germany altogether. That means the 5 East German states plus East Berlin went for the AfD for the first time. The AfD won, I believe, 27% of the vote there, beating the CDU in second place with 20%. So the AfD carried East Germany, and we can see still the Greens, even though they dropped down to 12%, 8-point drops, they were still able to win victories in cities like Münster or Köln, where they have, Cologne in English, they have a strong student body base, a strong, university cities where a lot of the youth vote goes to them, and also some of the, middle class, some of the more older voters are supportive of them in these cities. They've built strongholds and they've clearly solidified themselves as a major political force. Even though they've sustained losses, they are still able to compete with the SPD and the CDU in a lot of parts of Germany. But we can see a lot of the map is black and the kind of dark blue for the CDU, CSU, because of course they clearly won this election and completely dominated all of Germany with the exception of the East. But this is definitely a clear picture that shows that the divide between East and West Germany is still there. Even after over 30 years since reunification, the divides, the economic and political differences are pushing the West and East German voters to vote for completely different parties. And we can even see that in the city of Berlin itself, with the parts of the middle and west going towards the CDU and the Greens, and some of the East Berlin districts further on the outskirts going towards the AfD. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is briefly the youth vote. And this was a very important part of this election because this was the first time in the EU elections that the 16-year-olds were able to vote. The Greens had kind of made that a campaign promise. They wanted to lower the voting age from 18 to 16 for the EU elections, and it actually backfired for them. So when you look at the 16 to 24-year-old age bracket, the CDU actually won. Now, the CDU was the largest, the CDU-CSU was the largest party amongst this group, winning 17%, not by a lot, but nonetheless an improvement, and they won first place. The AfD, huge improvement in support, going from 5% up to 16 and plus 11 points, winning second place amongst the youth. Now, what's very interesting is when you look at the Greens, they suffered a historic, catastrophic defeat with the youth vote. They dropped from 34% down to 11%, a drop of 23 points with these 16 to 24-year-olds. And this is really what hurt the Greens. The Greens lost some support amongst the elderly, some support amongst middle-aged, older people, and people in their 20s and 30s. But amongst the youngest bracket, the Greens lost a lot of support, probably due to turnout, but a lot of them, didn't show up, and a lot less people were backing the Greens. Going from 34% to 11% is a huge hit, and that is kind of what brought them down across the board. The SPD, the FDP, Die Linke, and the BSV all kind of held above, 5, 6, 7% of the vote. Not too much of a change there. But this result was interesting because it shows that, at least amongst the young, there is a kind of political realignment in Germany away from the Greens and to the AfD on the one hand, and also the CDU, kind of more a rightward shift amongst the youth. But if you look at some of the older groups, we can see that it's kind of the opposite. The Greens are actually able to build a solid base of support amongst the elderly, which they had the 70 and older bracket, which they had previously struggled with. And of course, there's things that are still the same. The CDU, CSU does really well with people 60 and older, a group that has a very high turnout. That's historically been the case. The SPD is doing slightly better amongst the young than it has in previous elections, but that's not really, that's obviously being offset by the catastrophic losses from the Greens. Now, these results were definitely interesting. This was definitely a result that was a shock because it was a confirmation of a lot of things people had expected. The CDU and the AfD won a big victory. The parties of Germany's Traffic Light Coalition suffered a major defeat. This is a major bad signal for the Traffic Light Coalition, for the incumbent government. And so this will be obviously a very bad symbolic victory, or a symbolic defeat for them, rather. And so these results will decide Germany's delegation to the European Parliament. These MEPs will be in Brussels for the next 5 years, deciding EU legislation. This won't have completely a direct effect on what happens with German law, but nonetheless, it is very symbolic of what is going to happen in the future. We also have East German state elections, and we see the AfD clearly won in a lot of those states, and so that could be a very, a boost to them going forward for those elections in September. We also have the the Greens and the SPD kind of competing for being the dominant center-left party, maybe trying to want to build a future coalition government. But these were the results for the EU elections in Germany. Like I said, I will do another video covering in depth more the way each age group voted and each of the German states voted, and then of course after that I will cover, or maybe before that, cover each of the EU countries, France, Poland. We had interesting results, Austria, all the countries that I did the polls on, I will do the results for as well. So I wanted to give you guys this kind of brief update. The elections happened yesterday. I wanted to get this video kind of out as fast as I could. And so I hope you all liked it, and if you do, please like, share, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.